Good morning. Welcome to 5 Minutes in Mark. My name is Larry. This morning I get the privilege of leading us in Mark chapter 4, verse 35 to 41. And we're going to take a look at the account of Jesus calming the sea. Quickly, the context is Jesus has spent a day of teaching on the lake shore. And the crowds grew so great that he gets into a boat and he presses out from shore so that he can teach the crowds. And he teaches them in parables in Mark 4, 1 and 2. It talks about him sitting in the boat and teaching the crowds in parables. And we learn later in Mark 4, in verse 33 and 34, that he teaches the crowds in parables. And then, after the fact, he explains to his disciples what the parables mean. Now, as we transition to verse 35, he's going to teach them a living parable. They're going to get into a boat, and Jesus is going to teach them some phenomenal truth about himself. And so let's read the account. On that day, when evening came, he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They became very much afraid and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and sea obey him?" Wow. Jesus with power over the wind and the sea. Let's look at this a moment. Jesus makes an intentional change of venue. He's been teaching all day. Let us get into the boat and cross to the other side. He has some things he wants to teach to his immediate disciples. And so they leave the crowd. They get into the boat. Jesus is already in the boat, just as he was there in verse 36. And other boats. So the small flotilla of boats cast off and they head out. Jesus is exhausted from a day of ministry, and so he falls asleep on the cushion in the back of the boat. A storm comes up, which can happen quickly on the Sea of Galilee, and the wind blows, and the water is coming in, and the men are afraid for their lives, and so they wake him up. "Don't you care, Jesus, that we're going to drown here?" Verse 38. And so he gets up, and he easily, I love this, he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And immediately it's calm. The wind died down and it became perfectly calm. And his question, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Do you have storms that come into your life that seem overwhelming, and the fear that can come with it? The storms can be in so many different ways that the winds buffet our lives, be it financial stress, in a time of coronavirus, being shut in. It can be job loss, it can be financial strain, it can be pressure on our families, be it marriages or with children. So many ways. It can be our health. So many ways that we can become overwhelmed almost with the fears of life and forget that the master who created everything is in our boat and we're safe with him. Here's a question that I want us to reflect on. Do you ever wonder if Jesus is asleep in your boat and oblivious to your peril? Do you ever question, God, do you even know? I want us, as we reflect on that, and on your confidence in the Lord, in particular in the time of peril, that you reflect also, as you reflect on that, reflect on this text from Acts 2, verse 36. This is Peter in his great sermon there in Acts chapter 2, as he was wrapping up that sermon in verse 36. He says, "Therefore, Therefore, let the house of Israel know for certain that God has made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you crucified. God has made him both Lord and Christ. Lord, Kyrios, Master. It's a parallel term to Adonai that we find in the Old Testament. It's the Master who is the creator and controller of all that is. He's made him Master, and he's made him Christ, Messiah, Savior, the one that we can look to for help in our time of need, and we can cast all of our cares upon him. Let's never forget that Jesus is in our boat if we know him. He is Master and he is Lord, and let's cast all of our cares upon him.